Greetings, all. This is Rick Levine with your November astrological forecast. And before we get into what's going on up there in the cosmos, I want to announce the winner of this month's free chart reading. These are mini harmonics readings, and the winner each month is chosen off my email subscriber list. If you're not on that list, you can go to ricklevineastrologer.com. Sign up for the mailing list there. You will not be overwhelmed with lots of emails that you don't want, and the email list will never be sold, but I can keep you up to date on not only what I'm involved in, but what's going on up there and in reference to new releases on YouTube and so on. So, with no further ado, this month's winner of the chart interpretation, including harmonic aspects, is Jessica Bateman. Congratulations, Jessica. You will receive an email from me or my assistant, Gail, and we will get you scheduled for your free harmonics mini reading. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on up there, I do have some very exciting events coming up that I do want to share with you. For those of you who are not interested in these, you know how to work the fast forward. And there will be a link down below that will take you right to where the forecast begins. But for everyone else, here's some of the events that I do have coming up, and some of them I think are going to be quite exciting. First announcement that I want to make is that there will be no astrology night at Soul Food Coffee House for the next couple of months because I'll be on the road, actually mostly out of the country. I'll have more to say on that in a little bit. But for the immediate future, astrology nights will be suspended, and we will keep you informed as to when the next one will be. Some of you were in attendance of the Shifts Happen workshop in London last May, and there will be a Shifts Happen 2 this year, this May, and that actually will be on May 15th in London. More information on that to follow. But today I want to let everyone know that we are doing, I say we, that would be Steve Judd, Alex Trenowith, and myself. We are doing a mini Shifts Happen. And this little one evening event is called Microcosms, and it's going to be at the Courthouse Hotel in London on the evening of Monday, November 10th. And that'll be from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And Steve, Alex, and I will lead an intimate evening of astrology in motion. And this is going to be a bite-sized cosmic experience, exploring themes, transits, transformations, etc., that will be affecting the year ahead. And this is going to be set in a private theater just a few minutes from Oxford Circus in London. And the link to this event, information about it, and registration, along with all the other events that I mentioned, will be down below in the first of the comments that will be pinned to the top. And you can just follow that link for more information on this evening event, Monday, November 10th in London. It is limited in attendance, and if you're interested, make sure that you register in advance. Of course, the reason why I'm going to London is on my way to India for Back to Goa, which is the initiation into astrology. Probably a little bit late to register, but I will be in Goa from November 20th to December 2nd. And information on that workshop is still available at heavenandearthworkshops.com. And the link to that is also down below. In 2026, which is coming up faster than we realize, starting on Friday evening, February 27th through the following Thursday, March 5th, I will be doing a special 6-day journey, how to read a birth chart. And I'm very excited about this. We did a weekend workshop at this venue in Buellton, California, which is just a little bit north of Santa Barbara, California. Gorgeous place. And information on that is also available at heavenandearthworkshops.com. And this is How to Read Your Birth Chart, a 6-day journey into astrology using your own chart. Everyone will get their own chart out of this, and the individual charts that you have will become the curriculum for the week. And I'm very excited about this. This will be hands-on, and it'll be an intensive workshop that will be aimed at boosting your astrological fluency and providing you with the tools that are necessary in order to make sense of a natal horoscope. And so step by step, we're going to explore the planet signs, houses, aspects, and hopefully this 6-day immersion will make astrology come alive for you in ways that perhaps you can't even imagine. Then on March 20th, we will be sailing from Athens, Greece. And this event is called Mystery School at Sea. Complete information is available at mysteryschoolatsea.com. And this is going to be a 10-day luxury cruise voyage that's going to carry us across sacred lands, magical islands, crystalline waters, that's going to weave together some ancient wisdom, transformative experiences, and real connections. And this week will be a week of exploring teachings of mystery schools, including extraterrestrial contact, hidden histories, deeper truths to our reality, including the astrological perspectives, which I will be sharing with the participants. And we will be visiting sacred sites in Athens and Naphtalo, Heraklion, Rhodes, Kavala, Thessaloniki, Ephesus, and that's in Turkey. And this is going to be very exciting. Mysteryschoolatsea.com. And when you sign up, make sure that you let them know that you came there because I sent you there. Mystery School at Sea, March 20th through the 30th, in the Aegean Sea, sailing from Athens, Greece. That's going to be an amazing experience. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Shifts Happen 2 is going to be mid-May in London. That's May 15th through the 18th. And then I'm going to hop on an airplane, be back to Seattle for NORWAC. NORWAC is the Northwest Astrology Conference. Registration is now open for that at norwac.net. And I realized when I was thinking about this earlier today that my first NORWAC was in 1990, and I've missed 2 of them, making this my 35th NORWAC that I've attended. It's my favorite of all the astrology conferences that I go to. And I'm very excited because this year I'll be doing the opening keynote, a talk on the future of astrology. And on May 25th, that Monday after the conference, I'll be doing a full-day workshop called Quincunxes and Beyond. And this will be working with yods, iron yods, golden yods, yods of fate, and other very, very interesting ways of looking at yods, also known as the finger of God. Iron yods are sometimes known as Thor's hammer. And so this is going to be a really, really exciting time. And if you're interested in that, you should be registering soon because this conference does fill up to maximum. It's also available for virtual attendance, and I'm very excited about this conference. And then, of course, in September of next year, UAC 2026, that's the United Astrology Conference, Daring to Dream. This is going to be September 3rd through the 9th. And again, I'll be doing a couple of talks on the conference schedule itself. And then I'll be doing a post-conference workshop called Revisioning Transits, Understanding Moments in Time as Aspects of Repeating Cycles. So that's what I have coming up. I hope to see you at some of these events. All the links for these will be in the first comment down below. It'll be pinned to the top, and you can follow the links there. And with no further ado, let's get into this month. As we look ahead to the month of November, there are a few things that are apparent. First of all, the trine between Uranus and Pluto, which came very close to being exact, is now separating, and it will continue to do so for the next few months. But it's not over. And in fact, as it begins to push harder toward next spring, it's going to recall a lot of what's going on now. I've been saying for a few months now that this autumn, even August, September, October, and now November, are really about something that's not going to fully occur until next summer, when we have the first of the Uranus-Pluto trines, but it's then exact 5 times between 2026 and let's see, I think it's, yeah, early May of 2028. And so we're moving into a period of time where things are going to change radically. But right now, it may feel like that's getting a little bit further away. And for many people, that can be discouraging because it seems like we're floundering. In fact, many people are discouraged because it feels like all around the planet, regardless of where you live, regardless of what your philosophical, spiritual, political beliefs may be, it just seems like things are not moving along in the way that's beneficial to all. However, this Uranus-Pluto trine that at the beginning of this month on November 1st, the Uranus-Pluto trine is separating, and it's about 1.25 degrees from being exact. But it begins to widen. By December 1st, it's almost 3 degrees out of orb, and then by January 1st, it's nearly 5 degrees. And then by February, March, and April, it's 6 degrees or so, 6.5, almost 7 degrees from being exact. But then when Uranus turns direct, and others are getting ready to turn direct, Saturn turns direct this month, actually not until the end of the month. Then that will be followed by the other outer planets. On the other hand, Jupiter is just getting ready to turn retrograde. Jupiter turns retrograde on November 11th. But coming back to the Uranus-Pluto trine, which is really the underlying fundamental note of the biggest changes ahead, as we look at that Uranus-Pluto trine, as these planets turn direct by next spring, by the beginning of May, that 6-7 degree orb is down to 5 degrees. By the beginning of June, it's down to about 3 degrees. By the beginning of July, it's down to about 1 degree of orb. And then on July 17th, it's 0 degrees of orb. That's the first perfection of that Uranus-Pluto trine. Even by August of next year, it's still within 1 degree of orb. So a lot of what's happening now is building up to that period of time. But we need to say something about trines, because trines traditionally are considered to be good aspects, as opposed to squares, which are often considered to be, at least in traditional terms, to be difficult or afflictions even. But the problem with the trine is that the energy flows, whether it's flowing in a positive or negative way. And so trines are often, how do I want to say this? They grease the path so that the energy flows without resistance. And of course, it just depends on what's going on as to whether or not that's good or bad for any one individual, because it's possible that we try to make changes and the changes just aren't grabbing. And so that's the danger of a trine. And the reason why we're talking so much about not just the Uranus-Pluto trine, um, that is certainly, like I said, the background of what's coming up for the next several years. But also within that, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which I've been talking about for months now, as have been every astrologer on the planet, because that Saturn and Neptune at the beginning of this month is widened now to about 4 degrees, with both Saturn and Neptune having moved into Aries and now having both moved back into Pisces, retrograded back into Pisces. And so there's certainly this regressive kind of feeling like we're not making progress, like we've been here before, like we're stuck in some sort of Groundhog Day, and it's almost like we seem to be going over the same tracks again and again and again. Just remember that Saturn and Neptune will be turning direct, and as they turn direct and as they move out of Pisces for their final time in this particular run and move into Aries, things are going to begin moving forward very, very quickly. And of course, they move into Aries. Saturn moves into Aries next February 13th, and Neptune moves into Aries the end of January. And of course, they can join on February 20th of next year. And all of this sense of what's real, what's going on with the alleged intelligent comet 3I Atlas, or what's going on politically, or what's going on with all kinds of things that are in effect being either stopped from moving forward or suppressed. There's so much energy that right now, that in the United States in particular, with the government basically having been shut down now for just about a month, it just feels like everything is stuck into the past. It's not going to last. And it's important from an astrological perspective that we do understand that. And although these trines will actually grease the path, we start November with a very important trine that's slightly different than the fire air grand trine or trines that will be unfolding. That's the Uranus in Gemini, the Pluto in Aquarius air sign. And at the same time, we have the Neptune and Saturn that'll be moving back into Aries, making sextiles to both sides of that trine. And all of this is unfolding next year. But in the midst of all of that, we also have a grand water trine that really is holding the power for the entire month of November. We'll start looking at charts in just a moment, but I wanted to paint this overview of what's going on, because November is quite important and quite profound. But again, it's going to be frustrating if we feel like we want to see the progress that we know needs to happen, because the progress is still being kind of stuck into all these retrogrades, into the Saturn Neptune retrograded back into Pisces. In fact, retrograde Uranus, which has touched into Gemini. Uranus moved into Gemini back in July. And it will back into Taurus on the 7th of November. And again, that's just going to feel like more stuck, no change. Things are like not able to move forward. But aside from these energies, we also have the fact that the Saturn and Neptune in Pisces are trining or being trined by Jupiter in Cancer. and also Mercury and Mars at the end of Scorpio. Both of those have already made their trines with Jupiter and Saturn. Mercury has already moved into Sagittarius, which I think is a positive note. It's a bit uplifting, but Mars will be coming into that, and of course Mercury will be retrograding, and that's the other thing about November, of feeling like we're just not getting where we need to get to. And when we look at that Mercury, we're going to see another picture unfold for the month. I'm going to hold off on talking about that Mercury retrograde, except for the fact that it does turn retrograde on November 9th, and then it turns direct by the 29th of November. So we have most of November with Mercury traveling retrograde, and I'll have more to say about that in just a moment. In fact, let me now shift gears and bring up the chart, and I'm going to bring up the chart for November 1st. And as always, the charts that we are looking at will be for noon Pacific time, and the month starts with Pacific daylight time, but it transfers into standard time on Sunday morning, November 2nd. So pretty much all of the month, you have to realize that we're now looking at standard time rather than daylight time, which means that these times are all 8 hours behind Greenwich Mean Time or Universal Time. The chart that we are looking at is an Aries rising, as we always do, because remember, the rising sign, or the cardinal points, the ascendant and midheaven, and their opposite points, the descendant and the bottom of the heaven, the IC. These points are all based upon your locality, and since you're all over the world, we do not use houses in this. From a mundane standpoint, we're only looking at the planets and what tropical signs they're in, and the relationships or aspects that they are making with one another. So as we look at the chart for November 1st, we can see a few things. First of all, we can see a whole host of Piscean energy. So at noon on Saturday, November 1st, we have the moon at 17 degrees of Pisces, and it is basically on the lunar nodal axis. And we're going to come back and look at something very peculiar about that in just a moment also. But we can also see that Saturn and Neptune have both backed into Pisces. And the planets, because they're either retrograding or have just recently stationed or are going to station, there's not a lot of movement in these outer planets. Now, what this really means is that although the inner planets are moving, they're moving pretty quickly. Mars at the end of Scorpio moves almost a complete sign. That's about as fast as Mars moves. It moves from 28 degrees of Scorpio here at the beginning of the month to 20 degrees of Sagittarius by the end of the month. Venus also moves from Libra all the way through Scorpio and into Sagittarius by the end of the month. And so Mercury is a bit different because it's turning retrograde, and we'll get there in just a moment. But Venus and Mars are both moving rather quickly, and they're both stirring up a lot of noise this month. With Mercury, we begin the month with Mercury having just moved into Sagittarius. It's at 3 degrees of 3 degrees of Sagittarius. It moved into Sagittarius just a few days ago, or actually it was on October 29th. And here's the thing about Mercury and its retrograde. So Mercury actually on October 21st, it joined up with Mars. It was conjunct with Mars, and it did that at 20 degrees of Scorpio. Now, the thing is that when Mercury turns retrograde, it's going to back up to 20 degrees of Scorpio again. which means that Mercury entered its shadow back on October 21st. And we're going to talk about why that's so significant, because for the last week of October and all the way through December 16th, when Mercury, after having turned direct, will actually move into new territory starting on December 17th, that from October 21st through December 16th, Mercury is in that area of sky where it goes 1, 2, 3, where it goes direct, retrograde, and direct over that same area of sky. This is particularly interesting, this particular Mercury retrograde period, because Mercury entered Scorpio back at the beginning of October, October 6th. And then it entered Sagittarius, which is where it is now, on October 29th. Mercury turns retrograde on November 9th and backs into Scorpio on November 18th. Then it turns direct at the end of the month on November 29th. And then it moves forward and it actually re-enters Sagittarius on December 11th. What this means is that when a fast planet like Mercury goes direct, retrograde, and direct, there are aspects that it will make 2 or 3 times. So, for example, when Mercury actually entered its shadow on October 21st, it was actually aligning with Mars. That was exactly on October 19th, but it's close enough. When Mercury turns retrograde, it will join up with Mars a second time on November 12th. This is significant because it means that the energies that were stirred up may be back on our plate by mid-November, when Mercury again is aligning with Mars. Now, there's other very interesting aspects that Mercury makes that it will make 3 times also. As Mercury moved through the end of Scorpio, it made a trine with Jupiter on October 24th. And then it trined, that was Jupiter in Cancer. And then it trined Saturn in Pisces on the 25th. And then it trined Neptune on the 29th. Now, these 3 trines were creating kind of like a grand trine in the sky with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, with Jupiter in Cancer, and with Mercury at that time in Scorpio. As Mercury then backs up, it will repeat those same trines. And as it retrogrades, it will trine Neptune on the 19th of November, and then it will trine Jupiter and Saturn on the 22nd of November. And Jupiter and Saturn are in an interesting dance right now because they are themselves are very, very close to trine, and they hold that trine pretty much for the entire month. In fact, at the first of the month, on November 1st, the Jupiter Saturn trine is less than 1 degree of orb. It's at 46 minutes from being exact. On the 1st of December, that Jupiter Saturn trine is at 41 minutes of orb. That means it's like 2/3 of a degree from being exact. And it's that Jupiter Saturn trine that holds a lot of the glue of November together. But here's the thing, because Jupiter turns retrograde, that trine is never made exact throughout the entire month. And in fact, that Jupiter Saturn trine doesn't become exact until August 31st of next year. And so this is part again of why we're not going forward as quickly as we can, because even that trine between Jupiter and Saturn. And remember, the rhythm of Jupiter and Saturn is expansion, contraction. It's the 20-year decade cycle where Jupiter and Saturn conjoin in even numbered decades at the beginning, and then they're in opposition at the odd number decade. So Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct in the 1920s, expansive. They were opposition in the 30s, contractive. They were conjunct again in 1940, expansive. They were contractive in the 50s, the silent 50s. The 60s, they were conjunct again in 1960. That set that decade up as being expansive. They were opposed in 1970. That would be then contractive. The 80s expansive, the 90s contractive. 2000, actually, their conjunction was in early 2001, but our calendar isn't exact. Expansive, 2010, contractive. 2020 was the beginning of their actually next set, and this is an expansive decade, and then by 2030 it will be contractive again. This rhythm of breathing is really like inhale, exhale. But what's interesting is that that in that 20-year cycle, Jupiter and Saturn are trine two times, basically, either the opening trine and the closing trine. And right now we are at the period of that opening trine, 5 years or so into, after the process begins. Jupiter and Saturn right now through 25 and exact in 26 are making that trine where there's a bit of, again, harmony and balance, although it doesn't feel like it. It's preventing Saturn contraction, make it real, stabilize, Jupiter grow, expand, and go into new territory. And it's basically holding that in check a bit right now. So this is all important. And as we look at the chart for November 1st, we can see that Mercury has already moved through that trine because it has moved on into the fire sign Sagittarius. But Mercury also, that means it moved through the opposition to Uranus. And Mercury's opposition to Uranus was exact on the 29th, actually, just the day that it moved from Scorpio into Sagittarius. But as Mercury turns retrograde, not only will it replay that entire grand trine with Saturn, Neptune, with Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune, but it'll also replay the opposition to Uranus on November 19th. And so we're seeing this dynamic of this smooth, grand water trine that is really playing our emotions and stabilizing some energies or our desires for stabilization at the same time that Mercury is opposing Uranus and making communication a bit disruptive and a bit crazy making, if you will. But then when Mercury turns direct at the end of the month, it's going to move through that grand trine a third and final time, and it will then, moving direct, it will oppose Uranus again on December 10th, and this time that Uranus will be back in Taurus, and then Mercury will move from Scorpio, where it will have opposed Uranus in Taurus. And on the 11th, it will move into Sagittarius. It will then make its trines with Neptune, and then its trines with Saturn also, and with Jupiter. And the trine with Jupiter actually is on December 6th. So this grand trine is really important because it's kind of it's like a holding pattern, if you will. But as we look at the beginning of November, and here's the crazy making thing of November, um, as we look at the beginning of November, we also see the fact that Mars at the end of Scorpio is playing through this grand trine. It's also made its trine already to Jupiter and Saturn, but it has yet to make its trine to Neptune, and that's exact on November 3rd. But on top of that, as Mars moves from Scorpio into Sagittarius, As Mars moves into Sagittarius on the 4th, it will then oppose Uranus, just as Uranus is getting ready to back into Taurus from Gemini. And this again can be a bit disruptive. So these energies here, we can see a combination of a lot of trine energy with these oppositions from Mercury and Mars to Uranus. But then we also have one more factor to play into this whole thing. And that is the fact that on the 1st of November, we can see that Venus is just coming into its opposition to Chiron, and then it will then not only oppose Chiron, but it will also oppose, and it does that on the 1st of November, but it will also oppose Eris on the 2nd of November, and it makes that square with Jupiter also on the 2nd. And so we see this T-square between Venus opposing Chiron and Eris and squaring Jupiter, while at the same time, Jupiter is squaring Eris. Now, we have to stop here and say a word about the Jupiter square to Eris, because remember, Jupiter is turning retrograde, and Jupiter retrograde will square Eris exactly again on November 25th. It's as if this doesn't ever go away. We have this grand trine that's cooking in water, but at the same time, we have this rather disruptive and disturbing engagement between Venus and Libra, wanting to be diplomatic, wanting to smooth things over. And yet, because it's squaring to Jupiter, there may be this overcommitment, overindulgence, overstatement, and the Jupiter squaring Chiron and Eris is also kind of giving things a bigger than they are feeling. And there's a lot of things going on that are just saying that things just seem to be blown out of proportion right now. And yet I think that a lot of these things over the weeks and months ahead will come to light, but it's not going to happen overnight. And I think that's the significant thing. And that's the underlying message of this month. It's almost like we're not making the progress that we want to make, but there's continual disturbances in the field. I kind of think of this as there's a song by Robert Hunter that the Grateful Dead performs called Ripple, and it's ripple on still water where there is no pebble tossed. It's almost like these ripples are kind of building on their own, and yet it's important to understand that a big ripple can be a tidal wave. These aren't just trivial ripples. There's disturbances in that field that are kind of really stirring things up, and in some ways may release energies that are kind of like instant karma that might really bring things around, kind of into this moment of epiphany or reawakening, or kind of a desire for more immediate change. And yet that change is not going to happen overnight because of all of the trines, the grand trines, the Uranus Pluto trine, the impending conjunction between Saturn and Neptune that's not exact until next February, and then playing on until next summer. So that's where we stand at the beginning of the month, and it really is quite a potent period of time. As we move the chart forward to November 2nd, this is the exact Jupiter square Eris, still emphasizing that T square that we already talked about. We can also see that Mars is moving closer to its opposition to Uranus. That won't be exact until the 4th. We can also see that the moon has moved from Pisces into Aries. The moon moved into Aries at 7:39 this morning. And of course, as it did that before, as it was moving through the end of Pisces, the moon also conjoined Neptune on its way in. That happened at 7:15 this morning, just before it entered Aries at 7:39. We may feel a buzz today from that moon in Aries. It may really kick off the energy a bit more. There's certainly an uplifting part to that energy. We also have Venus making its exact square to Jupiter today. We need to be careful about biting off more than we can chew. That we need to be careful about overextending our energy, because that Venus is not only perfecting its square to Jupiter, but also its opposition to Eris. We may stir up trouble by taking a step too far. On Monday, the 3rd, we can see that the moon now is in mid-Aries. In fact, the moon will join up with Eris and Chiron and Eris, but it won't do that till later. The other thing here on the 3rd is that we have Mars now moving closer to its trine to Neptune, and that trine is exact at 8 o'clock this evening, actually 7:59 p.m. This actually suggests to me that it's hard to read the energy, but there's magic in the air. It's almost as if we can make something happen now that was impossible. Our thoughts, our dreams, our imagination can, in fact, impact reality, but we're going to need to do something about it. We're going to need to take it somewhere through physical action. And as Mars moves out of Scorpio and into Sagittarius, which it does at 5:01 a.m. on the morning of the 4th. And here we are looking at the chart for the 4th. We can see that Mars is now moved into Sagittarius. And of course, as it does that, it will also oppose Uranus. That occurs at 9:29. This can be quite disruptive. And we have this situation where yesterday, the 3rd, and today, the 4th, Mars opposing Uranus with Neptune kind of at that point of Thales, the point that is trine the Mars side of the opposition and sextile the Uranus side of the opposition. I think our imaginations, our dreams, our ideals here are quite significant, but we have to do something with them. With Mars and Mercury now both in Sagittarius, there's the sense of being able to communicate and really take action on what our words are. And remember, as Mercury turns retrograde, we will get a Mercury-Mars conjunction, even though Mercury theoretically moves faster than Mars, and it already conjoined that Mars once. Remember, Mercury conjoined Mars back on October 19th. But as it turns retrograde, it will conjoin Mars again on November 12th. We'll get there in a few minutes. So that's here on November 4th. We can also see now that the moon has moved into Taurus. Mars enters Sagittarius at 5:01 a.m. Again, all here on the 4th. The moon enters Taurus at 8:15 a.m. And then we have the Mars opposition to Uranus, and then the moon squares Pluto at 10:36 a.m. This can be a bit disruptive because it's really stirring up energy that's saying things that need to be said, that's doing things, that's acting impulsively on what we think needs to happen. And I think that there can be a bit of energy stirred up on this day, on this morning of November 4th. Also note that as the moon now is in Taurus, it's moving closer and closer to the full moon. And the actual full moon is on the 5th. And instead of going to the chart for noon on the 5th, we're going to look at the chart that is for the full moon. The full moon occurs at 5:19 a.m. And this full moon is, I think, an interesting one. There's not a lot of other aspects going on in relationship to the moon itself, although the moon will make a half square with Neptune, and that again can show how confusing the energy is, because we're not quite sure how to deal with this separation between the intensity and the emotional volatility and passion that we want to shine on everything. And yet that moon in Taurus is telling us, no, keep things simple, go with the flow, stabilize the energy rather than upsetting it. I don't think that there's a huge amount of energy. This is not the most potent full moon that I've ever seen, but we still are playing off the square with Jupiter still squaring Eris. Remember that Jupiter square Eris is with us, with Chiron and Eris is with us all month. That is November 5th. As we move to the 6th, we can see that Mars now in Sagittarius is actually making a sextile to Pluto, but it's now the energy is shifting so that we have that Mars opposition to Uranus, with the moon having moved into Gemini. The moon moved into Gemini at 7:20 this morning on the 6th, which means that the moon actually will also be not only moving into Gemini, but it will also conjoin Uranus, and it does that at 7:25. This also is a bit tough. This can be explosive. It can be exciting, but it's also, the moon is moving, as it moves into Gemini, it's picking up not only on the conjunction to Uranus, but by 9:41 this morning, it's making its trine with Pluto, and then it'll oppose Mars by 9:48. This again can be quite explosive and disruptive. And we also have the sun making a square and a half to Neptune. Remember, I said yesterday the moon was making a half square to Neptune. Well, the sun was within orb of that, but it took the sun a little bit longer to get to the point where it's making the square and a half to Neptune. And again, it's like, what is real? What is the truth? It's hard to know. It's hard to tell. And we also have the Jupiter Saturn trine that is getting closer. Remember, it gets closer and closer through the month, but it never quite reaches it because Jupiter turns retrograde. That Jupiter trine Saturn is now less than a half a degree from being exact. In fact, it gets within a quarter of a degree. It gets within a sixth of a degree by the 16th of November. And so we're feeling some sort of balance here, but it's difficult to do anything with it because it's hard to make something happen. So that is all on the 6th of November, when we can also see at noon that Venus is at 29 degrees of Libra, 52 minutes, which means that Venus is moving into Scorpio. It does that at 2:39 p.m. And as Venus shifts into Scorpio, it weakens the energy a bit, but there's other stuff going on here that's weakening Venus, because as Venus is moving through that last degree of Libra and into the first degree of Scorpio, it's going to become the apex of a traditional yod, a quincunx yod, because we have Neptune sextile to Uranus, and that Neptune sextile to Uranus in itself is a significant aspect this month, because Neptune sextiling to Uranus will actually become exact, and that exact aspect will be on November 20th. That's Uranus and Neptune sextile. But and so we can see the power of Uranus building here, even though even though Uranus has backed into Taurus, where it's not as free to stir things up, it takes more to make something happen. But when something happens, instead of just being a little tremor, it can be a real earthquake. And so we have some significant energy that can be stirred up here. And here on the 6th, as the moon goes over, as the moon joins up with Uranus, opposes Mars, and makes it sextile to Neptune, while Neptune and Uranus are both being quincunxed by Venus, Venus as the apex of that yod. Remember, the Venus quincunx to Neptune is exact at 8:36 this morning, and the Venus quincunx to Uranus is exact at 3:30 p.m. And in the interim, Venus moves from Libra into Scorpio, and as it does that, our feelings become a lot more internalized and profound, and we're not going to move as easily. We're not as willing to negotiate anymore. There's this sense that something's got to give, and we may feel that sense building through the entire month. Now, this is on November 6th. As we move to the 7th, there's basically the important things on the 7th is the fact that Venus, now having moved into Scorpio, makes an exact square with Pluto. This Venus-Pluto square, again, can really bring up powerful hidden feelings from underneath. We have stuff stirring all month, actually, for the last few months, and even for the next month or so, stuff being brought up that's been hidden. And Venus making that square to Pluto suggests that we might be wise in curbing some of our deepest feelings, because there's this sense of it going up against a power structure or something that's too deep or too strong. Yet in moderation, this can be quite powerful and quite productive. That is on the 7th. Oh, and then of course the other thing on the 7th is that Uranus retrograding from Gemini backs into Taurus, where it will remain. Uranus in Taurus stays there until it turns direct and then moves back into Gemini next April 25th. And then as it moves on, by July, it will be exactly trine to Pluto, as we've talked about earlier. That is all on the 7th. Mercury also is slowing down as we move to the 8th. There's no outer planet or planetary alignments that are exact. However, here on the 8th, we do have this is Saturday the 8th. We have the moon moving into Cancer, and that's at 7:05 a.m. And as the moon moves into Cancer, it will also make a trine with Venus a little bit later in the morning. It'll do that at 10:51 a.m. And that moon's moving into Cancer will also kind of pull our feelings in a bit more. We may not be so outgoing or willing to communicate. There's a sense of wanting to really hold on to our energy. In fact, as the moon moves into Cancer, it's also going to make quincunxes with both Mars and Pluto, making a short-lived yod, a quincunx traditional yod, because Mars has already made it sextile to Pluto. But there's that sense again of adjustment, and yet maybe we need to pull our feelings in and not be so verbal or outgoing with them. That's all on the 8th. Meanwhile, Mercury is barely moving at all. Mercury at the beginning of the month was at 3 degrees of Sagittarius, and it's slowing down. And it actually, on the 7th, was in the 6 degrees. It's still 6 degrees today. Mercury actually technically turns retrograde on the 9th, and it does that at 11:01 a.m., technically at 6 degrees of Sagittarius and 52 minutes, but it pretty much stays at 6 degrees even on November 12th. Mercury is still at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. So even though Mercury is turned retrograde, or is turning retrograde today on the 9th, it ain't moving very fast. And it may feel as if communication somewhat kind of, ties itself up in knots a bit, like we're not getting anywhere fast. Although it can be frustrating if it feels like we have things we need to say and places we need to go to, and it actually can be very useful, because Mercury retrograde is really a signal that's telling us that we have more time to get to where we need to get to, that if we don't push so hard, we can actually tie up some loose ends and make some things happen that otherwise may have gotten away from us. As we move to the 10th, we have the moon moving into Leo, and it does that at 9:33 this morning. But then it will oppose Pluto by noon, actually 12:16. And then it will trine Mars and Mercury later in the day. I think that as the moon moves into Leo, we have things that we want to express, and we're going to express them. This is kind of an outgoing energy. There can be a lot of movement by the evening, and it can be quite exciting as the moon trines Mars and squares Venus, and then trines Mercury all through this evening. And at the same time, Jupiter has slowed down. It's technically stationary now, and it turns retrograde tomorrow. Let's move this ahead to the 11th, where we now have Jupiter stationary retrograde at 25 degrees of Cancer. Note now that the Jupiter-Saturn trine is less than a quarter of a degree of being exact. And also the Neptune sextile to Uranus is also within a quarter of a degree of being exact. So there's some smooth energy occurring, but that Leo moon wants to put on a bit of a show. I think that's here on the 11th. Although Jupiter, I think, is exercising its kind of cautionary energy in Cancer. I think it's kind of really suggesting that if we pull our energy in just a notch, we'll be able to accomplish a lot more in the long run. Meanwhile, because Mercury is retrograding and Mars is moving forward, we can see here on the 11th how close that Mercury-Mars conjunction is. And if we move this ahead to the 12th, we can see that that conjunction is very close, with at noon Mercury at 6 degrees and 8 minutes and Mars at 5 degrees 58 minutes. They're within 10 minutes, within 1/6 of a degree of being exact. And they are, in fact, exact today at 3:15 p.m., which is really giving our words a way to turn into action. We can actually put our ideas into motion. We can be, what's the word I'm looking for? Forthright, direct, powerful in our communication. And in fact, we may be not only willing to, but eager to initiate communication that really stirs things up. We're ready to do that, I think, in a way that's very important, very profound. And that is all on November 12th. We also have on the 12th, the moon moving into Virgo. It doesn't do that until afternoon. So here at noon, you can see that the moon is at 27 degrees Leo, 56 minutes, but it will move into Virgo at 3:51 p.m. And that here on the 12th that moon moving into Virgo will actually settle our energies down a bit. I think it'll make us more analytical, and it actually encourages us to kind of think about what the best way is to do something rather than just bolting ahead and doing it. That's November 12th. As we move to the 13th, we have no exact outer planet energy. We have or exact aspects. We do on the 13th have the moon kind of stirring up a little energy because it makes squares to Mercury and Mars from Virgo to Sagittarius, and that can stir up energy a bit, but it's a relatively quiet day, which of course, as we know, are days when a lot can happen. The Jupiter Saturn trine is now exactly 1/5 of a degree from being perfected. It's 12 minutes of arc. And so that becomes quite important. And also, since Jupiter is now retrograding, it's moving back closer and closer to its squares to Eris and to Chiron. Both of those squares, the Jupiter square to Eris is now less than 1/4 of a degree. So all of these again are about stirring up energy, things seeming bigger than they really are. But remember, if things seem bigger than they are and we act on them, that actually can turn into something that can be quite expressive or even quite disruptive. That's on November 13th. On the 14th, we have Venus making a 2.5 to Saturn. And I think this is a bit of a restraining energy. I like this restraining energy, though, because I think that things have been kind of getting a little bit too, the ripples in the pond have been getting a little bit too close to tsunamis. And so I think that this can be a reminder to hold that energy back. This is on the 14th, the moon moving through Virgo also by later in the day, by 4:30 this afternoon, is opposing Saturn, while Venus is making that 2.5 to Saturn. And so I think we're seeing that playing out in a number of ways, but it may feel like we have to pull our energy back a bit in order to do what we need to do. And then as we move to um, Saturday, the 15th, the moon moves into Libra. It does that at 1:43 a.m. on Saturday morning. And that moon moving into Libra, before it does that, it'll oppose Neptune. That can be a bit confusing. This is just after midnight Pacific time. But then once the moon moves into Libra, it's going to make a trine to Pluto. I think we have a day here of a little bit of a relaxing energy here on the 15th. I think it's almost like we have time to integrate, but we also have today Mars making a 2.5 to Chiron. And I think that this also can kind of stir up our hurt, a bit. It can make us a bit sore or angry. We can overreact on that. But that Mars 2.5 to Chiron is not exact until early tomorrow morning. Let's move this ahead to the 16th. And on the 16th, we can now see that not only is Mars making that 2.5 to Chiron, which can stir up some real uncomfortable feelings. This is not an easy energy. We've also had the sun moving through its quincunx with Chiron. That was exact yesterday. But these are not comfortable energies, and yet we're coming into a time where I think that this water grand trine that we began the month with, you remember we began the month with Mars coming into those at the end of Scorpio, into that grand trine point. And now we have the sun moving through 24, 25, 26 degrees of Scorpio over the days ahead. And so we have the sun that's building on this grand water trine, which again, I think gives us some relief from the complicated energies that we have had. Let's move this ahead from the 16th, where, oh, we can see here on the 16th that the sun makes its exact trine to Jupiter later this evening, and it'll make its trine to Saturn early tomorrow morning. Let's move this ahead to the 17th, and we can now see how strong that sun at 25 degrees of Scorpio, Saturn at 25 degrees of Pisces, and Jupiter at 25, Jupiter retrograde at 25 degrees of Cancer. We're getting a replay on this kind of self-sufficient emotional energy, as if we have a pattern that we can fall back on and maybe find some respite or some, easing, some pause in the craziness. And yet we're also getting some complicated energy building up from Mars, as Mars is moving into a square and a half to Chiron and Eris on one side, and Jupiter on the other side, as Jupiter is moving back into that square with Chiron and Eris. This Mars, Chiron, Eris, Jupiter is another form of a yod. Some people call this an iron yod, where you have the normal sextile side of the yod widened out to a square. Some people call this Thor's hammer, but this is really stirring up some complicated energy, and that Mars in Sagittarius that has somewhere to go may in some way have to deal with the overstatement of energy here somehow with that Jupiter portion of it, and just bring things back into focus. But we do have that grand trine, which I think ultimately will make things okay. We also have retrograde Mercury backing into its sextile with Pluto. Now, remember, I talked about that retrograde Mercury, its sextile to Pluto, which is exact today on the 17th, is reminiscent of the direct Mercury sextile with Pluto back at the end of October, October 30th. And so we're in the second phase now, as retrograde Mercury is playing back through its sextile to Pluto, and then its trines to Neptune, and then it's trine to Pluto, and then it's opposition to Uranus, and then it's trine to Jupiter. All of this is going to be reminiscent of energy that was in play toward the last week of October. This is now November 17th. We also have Mars making the exact square and a half to Eris. It made the exact square and a half to Chiron yesterday. And then tomorrow it will make its exact square and a half to the Jupiter side of this. So there's definitely some motivation to get things done here. This is about world in motion. Things are happening. That is on the 17th. Oh, we also have the moon moving into Scorpio just afternoon at 1:44 p.m. And this can actually intensify energies again, because if we move this ahead to the 18th, we can now see that we're coming toward a new moon, but we have the moon and Venus and the sun all in Scorpio, with Mercury retrograding, ready to back into Scorpio. Mercury backs into Scorpio actually later today at 7:20 p.m. So this is quite an intense pileup of energy. And of course, as Mercury backs up into Scorpio, it's going to then pick up on that trine again to Neptune. And so we can see that watery grand trine building and building as the sun is pushing forward into the trine, into the grand trine, past its trine to Jupiter, past its trine to Saturn, but still well within orb, and now moving toward its trine to Neptune, as retrograde Mercury is backing into each of those trines, and will continue to push them until the 22nd, when it makes its trines to Jupiter and Saturn. So I think that there's a real flow of energy here, but it's not without its complications. That is on the 18th. As we move ahead to the 19th, now Mercury, having backed into Scorpio, is going to oppose Uranus exactly. This is for the second of 3 times. Again, I mentioned this earlier because Mercury opposed Uranus on October 29th, and it will again on December 10th. So this is about saying things that are impulsive, that we want to bring to the surface. This is again, a time where words are flying. There's a lot of very important things being said. We can learn a lot from this because a lot of things are coming out into the surface, but it may be so much we may feel even a bit overwhelmed. This is on the 19th. We also obviously today are pushing toward the new moon, and the new moon on the 19th is at 10:47 p.m. And of course, that's Pacific time, which means that in a lot of places, that new moon is going to be in the early hours of the 20th, or for that matter, even later in the day, depending upon where you are on the planet. But this new moon in Scorpio is incredibly potent. The full moon a couple of weeks ago was not nearly as potent as this. Why? Because the new moon at 28 degrees of Scorpio is applying to an opposition to Uranus. It's also mixing up that grand water trine and applying to its trines to Neptune. Again, the power of the illusion, the power of the dream, the power of the ideal, the power of saying things the way things are. The Mercury conjoining with the moon. This is an applying aspect because retrograde Mercury is coming back toward both the new moon and the sun. And this is, I think, an absolutely potent new moon, where if we can remember that compassion and kindness is important, that it's not about convincing someone else that we're right about anything. It's about opening our perspective and using our ability to communicate to help someone else see that there are more perspectives available, not to tell them that we are right and they are wrong, but just to create dialogue, to use the power of the lightning crash of Uranus, that aha, the lights going on, to wake up, that is what this new moon is all about. And it's particularly potent because it brings things to such a precision perspective. And then just a little bit later, that new moon, I mean, the new moon is at 10:47 p.m. And by 2:25 a.m. the following day, which means 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, like within 4.5, well, less than 4 hours, 3.5 hours, the moon moves into Sagittarius. And of course, this is going to be followed by the sun moving into Sagittarius on the 21st. And it's also followed by the fact that the moon will join up with Mercury. This is just a really rock and roll new moon. I mean, the new moon is at 10:47. The moon lines up with Mercury at 11:15. Then the sun lines up with Mercury at 1:23 a.m. So these are all within just a couple of hours. And then the moon immediately, as it moves into as the moon before the moon moves into Sagittarius, it's going to trine Neptune, and then it'll oppose Uranus. This is all still early in the morning, in the wee hours of the morning on the 20th. Let me move this ahead to the 20th. And the moon will oppose Uranus, and then the moon moves into Sagittarius at 2:25 a.m. But then, just as soon as it does that, it's then going to sextile Pluto at just before 6 a.m. And then it's going to continue to move until it catches up to Mars and the moon will catch up to Mars tomorrow. That is the 21st by 3:12 a.m. And then the sun will oppose Uranus also tomorrow at 4:25 a.m. So this is an incredibly potent period of time. And into the mix of all of this, we have the exact sextile that I also mentioned back at the beginning of the month between Uranus and Neptune. And this Uranus-Neptune sextile is exact 5 times all the way through 2027. And that Uranus-Neptune sextile is really part of the Uranus-Pluto trine, as Neptune is at the middle point, and it's still a little bit out of whack, but it will become a lot tighter by next summer, back to that July 17th through the 20th period of time in July. But we're getting here this opportunity for sudden change based upon our dreams, our illusions, our imagination. This is an incredibly potent new moon. Again, I'm saying that because it's really important to plant the seeds that we want to come to fruition. But planting the seeds isn't just an idle planting them, it's planting them and doing something about it. And we can see here that on the 20th, by the time we get to the 21st, we have the sun exactly opposing Uranus. Again, we're talking major disruption. The moon has moved on into Sagittarius. Our ideals are pulling us into the future. These are all incredibly strong aspects. The sun's entry into Sagittarius, the sun enters into Sagittarius at 5:35 p.m. today, on the 21st. Just prior to that, it will make a trine to Neptune. But again, now the sun and Mercury are still going to make other trines, the sun making its trine to Neptune before it moves into Sagittarius, and then retrograde Mercury making its trines to Jupiter and Saturn that are not exact until tomorrow. Let's move this ahead to the 22nd. We do have the moon moving into Capricorn just before 3 o'clock, 2:52 p.m. That can settle the energies down again a bit. But here on the 22nd, retrograde Mercury is trining both Jupiter and Saturn. These are incredibly tight grand trines. Jupiter and Saturn now are slightly beginning to separate, but they're still less than 1/4 of a degree from being exact, from being perfected. This is all on the 22nd. As we go to the 23rd, we have the sun now making its sextile with Pluto. This is giving us the ability to talk about things that are deep, things that are hidden, to basically, in a way, engage in reality in a way that matters. The moon moving through Capricorn is also kind of, it's enforcing, it's requiring us to think deeper and to be a bit more serious rather than just running off at the handle, doing something without necessarily thinking it through. And this is especially important since we're coming off these oppositions of the new moon and then the sun opposing Uranus. And I think now we're becoming a bit more considering what the consequences are rather than just doing something. That is the 23rd. As we move to the 24th, again, not a lot going on. The 24th just shows that the moon is still moving through Capricorn. In fact, by midday, that Capricorn moon is opposing Jupiter and squaring Chiron and Eris. That can make things a bit more complicated. It can stir up some energy, but I think it's really important here just not to take things too far. I think that moon in Capricorn is a really good stabilizing energy for us. if we pay attention to it and don't overextend. Also, today, Mars is moving through the bendings to the nodes. That's the 90-degree point to the nodal axis. And I think that that gives us a chance to use that Martian energy in a way that gets something accomplished. When a planet squares the nodes, it's like that planet is brought into a high focus. And if we work with that energy, that Mars in Sagittarius, not working for immediate gratification, but working towards a long distance goal, that Mars in Sagittarius reminds us that when we aim for the top of the mountain, whether we get there or not, or whether we're there today or not, is less important than the fact that we're actually working towards a long-term goal. That is on the 24th. As we get to the 25th, we can see that the moon has moved into Aquarius. It does that at 2:15 a.m. this morning, just after midnight. Accordingly, the moon will also line up with Pluto. The moon moves into Aquarius at 2:15 a.m. And then the moon joins up with Pluto at 5:44 a.m. This is an intensification of energies. It's emphasizing the Uranus-Pluto trine, because the moon would actually trine Uranus just before it changes signs. That would be at 12:51 a.m. this morning. So there's a lot of action here on the 25th early in the morning. But aside from everything else still being active, especially the now separating Mercury trining Jupiter, because Mercury has moved through it. Venus going direct is still moving toward that trine. So we're still ending this month with the same trine, grand trine, that we began the month with. It's really an interesting thing that just gives us that weird feeling of time warp. It's almost like so much has happened this month already, but we're still in the same place. It's that Groundhog Day all over again. This is on the 25th, when Jupiter is making the exact square to Eris again, the same square that it made at the very beginning of the month. And then as we move to the 26th, we can see now on the 26th that Venus is making its exact trine to Jupiter. Venus is trining Jupiter this morning and then trining Saturn by this afternoon. So this is that exact grand trine. This is a day when things might feel like they're in balance. This is a day where I think finding pleasure, seeking, taking, you know what it is? It's almost like we can go on a one-day vacation today, wherever we are. Now, it's interesting because we still have Jupiter squaring Eris, which is still, there's this background of disruption. We still have Mercury lining up with Venus. That's retrograde Mercury backing into Venus. And it was exact in the afternoon of the 24th. But this is still all about pleasure. What's interesting here is that we're at the very end of the Mercury retrograde, and we're also kind of pushing toward the end of the Saturn retrograde, that both Mercury and Saturn will turn direct by the end of the month here on the 26th, though we have this grand trine that I think is really suggesting a day to take it easy. We go to the 27th, and we can see that by noon, the moon is in Pisces. The moon enters Pisces just before noon at 11:23 a.m. As the moon moves through Pisces in the next couple of days, it will pick up on the rest of that grand trine all over again. It will magnify it one more time before that grand trine begins to wane and pass into the past. Here on the 27th, though, we have Saturn making its station direct. Saturn at 25 degrees and 9 minutes of Pisces. It is still in that grand trine with Jupiter and Mercury and Venus. Remember, Mercury will turn direct and go through that entire grand trine a third and final time toward the second week of December. We'll talk more about that next month. But here on the 27th, with the moon in Pisces, we may decide that it's time to just kind of go with the flow a bit more. There's, I think, a relaxing of the energy, even though the deeper energies do not go away. We still have a lot of stuff that we need to work through. Here on the 27th, we also have Mars making a half square with Pluto, and this can stir up those deeper energies one more time. You know, it's like we get to focus on pleasure, but it's like we can't just let go of the deeper issues that are there that we still need to be dealing with. Nevertheless, I think that there's time here to replenish our own batteries. As we move to the 28th, it's a quiet day from a standpoint of exact aspects. But those of you who know that I've talked about this many times before, it's like we're so busy during the week, we don't have time to get sick. And then Sunday rolls around and we have nothing to do and we feel crappy the whole day. Because it's almost like we let down and we get to deal with the things we didn't deal with, like the fact that we need rest or whatever. And here on the 28th, it's a day when there are not a lot of aspects. Even the moon is relatively quiet, except for a square to Mars later in the day this evening. But I think that that means that the 28th is a taking care of business day. Friday, it's like a going back in. You know, Mercury is now moving direct. Saturn is just stationing direct. I said Mercury is moving direct. Mercury is actually stationed direct. It doesn't technically turn direct until the 29th. But with Mercury and Saturn kind of really slowed down, again, we're at this kind of point where it might feel like even if we've been bobbing around on the ripples or the waves, this can be like a frozen moment in time, I think. It'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. As we go to the 29th, we have the moon now kind of going through its grand trine point. On the 29th, the moon will trine Jupiter at 7:45 this morning. It'll line up with Saturn by 8:42. Mercury technically turns direct at 9:38, but that's like an overstated accuracy. The fact is that Mercury isn't moving today at all. The moon then makes a trine with Venus at 3:12 p.m., and then the moon catches up. It makes a sextile with Uranus, stirring things up by 3:30. The moon then lines up with Neptune by 4:05, and then the moon moves into Aries, and this is the key thing for the day. The moon moves into Aries at 5:06 p.m. And this really kind of says, okay, we're ready to start something new. On top of that, Venus reaches its opposition to Uranus today on the 29th. That occurs at 6:48 p.m. It's like the energy really begins to pick up paces through the day. Things really, really begin to happen. And I think that that takes us all the way through the end of the day on the 29th. And as we move to the 30th, we can see by midday the moon is in mid Aries. We're ready to go now. I mean, and on top of that, this grand trine is beginning to play down. We still have Venus needing to make its last piece of this grand water trine, as Venus will make its trine to Neptune. And then it's just a matter of waiting until Mercury direct next month picks up on the trines as it begins to move forward. But that's not until beginning like the 6th through the 12th, 13th of December. But I think here, as we reach the end of the month with the moon in Aries, I think we feel motivated to do something. Venus making its opposition to Uranus says, I have desire for immediate gratification. I want something now. Whether I do it or not is another question. Remember, Neptune is at that point of Thales that is trine one side. The Venus trine Neptune is exact. Venus is trine Neptune. And we have Venus just getting ready to change signs. Venus moves from Scorpio into Sagittarius just afternoon today at 12:13 p.m. But we can also see that the Venus opposition Uranus, which was exact yesterday, and the Uranus sextile Neptune, which was exact a few days ago, but that Uranus sextile to Neptune is still less than, it's 1/3 of a degree. It's less than a half a degree from being exact. So I think we're ending the month with some positive energy, but we also have to remember that the sun is also coming through that same point where Mars moved through earlier in the month, and that is making that iron yod, or the hammer of Thor, as the sun makes a square and a half to Chiron today on the 30th. And then over the next couple of days, it will also make squares, its square and a half to Eris and to Jupiter. And remember how close that square is right now. The square from Jupiter to Eris is less than a quarter of a degree. So we're getting, again, just as the month began with a mixture of free-flowing trine energy, we're ending the month with a mixture of that same free-flowing trine energy, and yet we're getting another round of the harshness of, at the beginning of the month, it was a T-square with Jupiter at the apex of the T-square, and now we're getting that same energy. Instead of Jupiter being the apex of a T-square, Jupiter is at one part of the base of that iron yod, as it's making the squares to Chiron and Eris, and both Chiron, Eris, and Jupiter are making sesquisquares to the sun. So it's an interesting dynamic where it almost feels like here we are at the end of the month in the same place the month began, but so much has happened in the month, it's hard to even figure out what was real, what was not real, what happened, what didn't happen. And, again, I'm ending this with the same thing that I've said for several months now, that these are incredible and dynamic times. It's so important that we pay attention to what's going on, but that we don't become overwhelmed and discouraged by how we are being manipulated, or how our little echo chambers of the internet are feeding back to us energy that makes us more extreme about whatever it is we feel. This is the grand delusion right now that we need to bust through. We need to find commonality with those extreme forces that are out there. That doesn't mean we need to change our beliefs. It means that we need to open our perspective so we can go to a higher cause or a higher level. Remember, it was Albert Einstein who said that problems are never solved at the same level of the problem itself. We have to some way elevate ourselves into a new level, almost like an ascension, if you will, so that we can find places to widen our perspective, so that we can find solutions that are already present, but will take until early next year to begin to unfold. That's it. Think cosmically, act locally. Thinking cosmically is important, but acting locally is the way in which you impact the reality around us. And without having that impact, it's just a waste of energy to think cosmically. That's it for now. I'll see you all, for some of you, for the mid-month update, for those of you who are on my $3 a month Patreon. Otherwise, I'll see the rest of you for the December forecast. That's it for now. Peace out.